All right, so let me read an excerpt from your article, and then I just want to pick your brain and see what else we can draw out. So you wrote this: if 100 men in peak physical condition were stranded on an island with 100 transgender women, in 100 years, not a single person on the island would be alive, and no new generations would have been created. That is a fact, not an attack. The question we should answer as a society is whether enshrining such radical changes in our laws and culture is a sign of progress. In 15 years, there will be thousands of adults with serious mental illness and conversion regret who will be rightfully upset at the adults who failed to tell them the truth in love. Some of these individuals will be missing hunks of their flesh from their legs and other parts of their bodies that were used to fashion artificial sex organs. Christian leaders who are largely silent on these issues are neither loving nor kind. The evangelical church should be taking the lead in answering those questions, but an honest observer can see the unspoken compact between the sacred and the secular realms that has developed over time. I thought that was fantastic. What are your further thoughts? What kind of inspired you to write that?
I was trying to find a way to really capture sort of the ideology that we're dealing with. And as someone, I grew up in church. I did not come to sort of reform theology, so to speak, until I was maybe 5-6 years ago. So much later in life. So issues around sexual ethics and biblical worldview are ones that were sort of in my orbit, but I didn't have a fully sort of fleshed out worldview as it related to, sex and marriage and some of these other things. I mean, again, I think I had a biblical view of marriage, one man, one woman for one lifetime, right? Obviously
but it was hanging in midair. A
Correct.
lot of guys, right? So it's like a lot of guys knew the what, but they didn't know the why. So they have the right view, but it's hanging in midair. They don't have the framework to actually root it and say it springs out of blank.
Exactly. So when I thought about the issues, and particularly as it relates to transgenderism, right? Because this is wordplay. We know that a transgender woman is a man, right? He may have cut his hair. He may have, wearing women's clothes. He may go by a different name, but he's still a man. Every cell in his body says that he's a male.
That's right.
So I wanted an example that would show exactly how male a transgender woman is. Mm-hmm. So this really was to counter the narrative, and I'm sure you've seen this, where people will say, transgender women are women. Okay. Well, if they really were, again, you get 100 guys in peak physical condition, right, and you get 100 actual women in peak physical condition, mm-hmm, and absent any, medical issues and so on and so forth, those people can be fruitful. But the sort of
100 men and 100 transgender women,
correct,
cannot be fruitful.
Correct. And I wanted to sort of point out that this thing terminates at those two individuals.
That's right.
You cannot be faithful to God's command to be fruitful and multiply. And actually, this hit me today in a different way. I was going to tweet about it, but I'll say it here first. You have people whose entire worldview in terms of creation is based on Darwinian evolution, mm-hmm, who are embracing an ideology that if you take their worldview to its logical end, right, they will cull themselves from the herd, mm-hmm, right? Because they that would be their contribution to natural selection. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of what I was trying to get at when I used that passage. The other part of it, towards the latter part, was, as I said, the compact. It's a quiet compact, but I notice it from Big Eva, right? Some of these prior church ministries, the pastors and the public theologians, men and women,
right,
who use social media to comment on every social issue. I mean, when a 17-year-old kid from Eastern Kentucky with a MAGA hat on, right, has a half a smirk, these people, they summon and they say, this is the face of white privilege, and so on and so on and so forth. But then when you see these issues going on, I mean,
and never apologize. They never walk it back.
Correct. That's the other thing. They never walked it back. But when you see these issues going on, and these are civilizational issues, right? I mean, these are the types of things where if you can't get male and female right, you can't get anything right. You're talking about like foundational stuff. And these people will never say they will never hit on the gender ideology and the sexual orientation ideology nearly as hard as they hit on issues of racism or sexism. So when they go to the Atlantic or when they're featured in the New York Times, I already know what they're going to say.
Right.
They're going to give me sort of, they're either going to be silent or they're going to handle these issues with extreme care and caution.
Yeah.
But when it comes to rooting out what they see as any vestige of Trumpism or Christian nationalism, then they go full bloodhound.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I always say it's so that compact. One way that I would describe that is I would say that the compact was at some point, and I think of Southern Baptists, right? So there was, the great conservative resurgence. They had guys in the seminaries who were saying that Jesus was the bastard son of a whore, and taking the Bible and literally throwing it in the trash the first day of class when they were passing out the syllabuses. And so, Al Mohler came in, and he was one of the guys who kind of led this, this conservative resurgence and cleaned house, and all those kinds of things. And they won the battle for inerrancy, and John MacArthur and R.C. Sproul and guys were a part of that. I personally see Al Mohler as kind of an opportunist because I think that he says on the briefing things that are conservative, but I don't see him in action doing those same things in his seminary today. He did them in the past. But my point is with inerrancy, I think part of the compact is that Big Eva has said, you let us say the Bible's inerrant, and we promise not to make it sufficient. So if you give us inerrancy, we'll surrender sufficiency. Because the Bible, saying Jesus is Lord and all those kinds of things, saying these things as though they are truths and as though they are universal, absolute truths, with the silent promise never to apply the truths, then Caesar doesn't see that as a threat. John the Baptist, he took his gospel and law, he took his truths of the Bible, and he applied it. And he didn't just apply it to people in the church who had given him permission, but he applied it to even Herod. It is not lawful for you to have her. He's not a professing Christian. He's not a part of the church. Yeah. God has commandments, and they're not given to the church. They're given to mankind, everybody. Right. It's not lawful for him to have her, and he begins to apply the scripture to someone in the civil magistrate, somebody outside of the church in the public square, and the result is he loses his head. But we have in Big Eva, we have those who love the glory that comes from men more than the glory that comes from God. And so I think you're right. There's absolutely this silent agreement that's been made, and you're right. It's kind of like if you ever seen a movie where there's like a big honking, hulking bully who's like 6 feet tall, and it's like he's failed the 8th grade, 3 times. He's twice the size of all the other kids, and he's picking on somebody. And that person doesn't want to lose face because everybody's standing around, in the lockers and watching this thing go down. And so he says something really strong to the shrimpy kid next to him, who's standing next to the bully. And I feel like that's Russell Moore. That's Tim Keller, and I'm grateful for things that these guys have done in the past. But right now it's like the enemy's at the gate. You've got, the undoing of God's created order down to its rudimentary form of male and female. And they're picking on the kid with a smirk on his face and a MAGA hat. Like so you got a giant. Goliath is standing right in front of you. And instead, you're talking to one of the Philistines next to him as though he's the actual threat. Because you don't want to say nothing because then you're seen as a coward. So you got to say something, but you can't actually say something to the real threat, to the real giant, because you're afraid. Wait. Real quick, before you go, do me a favor. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell so you'll be notified with all our new content as it comes out on a daily basis. And if you're willing to support this ministry, you can do so by going to rightresponseministries.com/donate. Thanks so much. God bless.